Now it's time to add some code that actually listens to our buttons so that eventually we can have a user play our game. The first step in that is we're going to have to create a variable for a player. I'm going to call this one left player. And because the left player button is attached to pin 12, I'm going to put a 12 right here. And then I'm going to have to set the pin mode for the player. And the pin mode for an input is different than the pin mode for an output. So I'm going to say left player, and then I'm going to put input pull up. It's very important that you include the pull up part here, otherwise you could do damage to your Arduino or your microchip. So this is how you do it. And then we are going to see how the button works. So I'm going to get rid of this code that we have inside the loop, and I'm going to use the serial monitor again to show us a little bit about how these Arduinos function. Digital read allows us to read what that button is seeing, and then I'm going to make sure I'm referring to the right pin, which is the left player pin. I could put a 12 here, but it's a lot more readable, it's a lot more understandable if I refer to the variable that represents that. I'm going to open up my serial monitor and start the simulation. And you can see one's printing down here. And then if I push the button, you should notice that zeros appear. If I release the button, I see ones again. Push it again, I see zeros. So when the button is pushed, it displays zeros. So to write some code that does something when the button is being pressed, let's turn our serial print line command into an if statement that checks the pin associated with the left player for a 0 or false value. So I'm going to get rid of the serial print line part and just put if. Gotta have my opening parenthesis here. If digital read left player, and then I'm going to put equals 0. Now remember, because it's an if statement, I have to get rid of this semicolon. And then I'm going to go ahead and put an opening curly brace here for now, because eventually this if statement is going to have a lot more code in it. But for now, we're just going to have it print a message, and the message will be serial.println, and it's going to say button pressed. Now, if I start my simulation, I'm going to clear the serial monitor here, and I'm going to start the simulation. And if I just click the button, I don't hold it down. If I just click it, let's see what happens. If I just click it, I get button pressed showing up several times. What's going on there? It's because when two pieces of metal within a switch come together, they actually bounce off each other several times before they stop moving. To the human eye, it looks as though only one thing happened. The switch closed. But a microcontroller reads data fast enough that it can actually detect those bounces, which is a problem for us. We only want to see the button pressed message appear once. So we need to figure out a way to listen to the first contact and ignore the rest. The easiest way to do this is to include a short delay within our if statement. That effectively stops the microcontroller from doing anything for however much time we specify. Typically, about a half a second or 500 milliseconds works great. So, I'm going to first have to hit stop simulation, and then I'm going to add a new line right here, and all it's going to do is say delay 500. And then I'm going to clear the serial monitor just so it's not too confusing to see what's going on here. And start the simulation again. And if I click the button, I see button pressed appears once. If I click it again, it appears again. So this is the functionality that we want to see. Now that we have a way to detect a button press, the next step is to get that to cause the score to change. So to get our if statement to actually change the score, we're going to have to change the score variable inside here every time the button is pressed. So instead of having serial print line button pressed, I'm actually going to have it say score equals score minus 1. Now I could do it this way. Another equivalent expression is to write it like this. I could say score minus equals 1. That also works. It's the same thing, just a different way of doing it, a little shorthand. Or I can even do this. If I know it's going to be only 1 that I change it by, I can actually just do score minus minus. I'm showing you all three because you're going to see all three as you grow as a programmer, and it's important that you understand these things when you come across them. So how do I see this score? I've changed this score, but now I want to see it when I run my program. Well, first I need to actually show the score at the very beginning. So the setup runs before the loop runs. The setup runs once, and then the loop runs over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do is at the very end of the setup, I'm going to have it show the score. And then when I change the score inside this if statement, I'm going to call the show score function again. And if the score decrements, if it gets lower, I should see that instead of being the starting LED of 3, oh, my score is still 6. I'm going to change that to a 3 so that it shows the middle score that we want. Instead of being a 3, it should decrease. It should become a 2, and I should see this LED light up. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So the middle LED lit up because I changed my score from 6 to 3. And if I push the button, I see the score changes. It went from 3 to 2, and if I push it again, it goes from 2 to 1. And 1 to 0. Okay, I have a way to change the score in this game. At this point, I want you to take time right now to commit your code to Bitbucket before you add code for the right player. Now, using what you've learned, add an if statement that will detect when the right player has pressed the button and change the score accordingly. Remember, you're going to need, number one, you're going to need to declare a variable for the right player and set it equal to the correct pin. 2, you're going to need to create another if statement just below the one you made for the left player that checks whether the right player's button was pressed. Now I want you to make sure that when you do that, it's inside the loop. So notice how this if statement is inside the loop. The if statement you create for the right player is going to have to be inside this loop still. This is the beginning of the loop right up here. This is the end of the loop. Press enter once right here and put your if statement right here. And 3. You're going to need to increment the score variable so that the scoreboard shows the score moving towards the right player. Remember, since we're moving the score in the opposite direction, you'll have to do the opposite of what we did for the left player. Once you get the code for the right player working, I want you to make another commit to Bitbucket.